Hey everybody, welcome into Talking Tactics with Coach Gough, the new and improved version of the show. That's right, we are back to actually sounding like, maybe just a little bit like, we know what we're doing, because the one and only Mike Hudson has joined our motley crew here to help produce the show. So I have no idea if he's done anything with this episode because I'm just recording it and I'll listen to it later. But thanks anyway, Mike, because I really appreciate the help. FC Cincinnati fell to third in the Eastern Conference standings on Saturday after once again failing to win at TQL Stadium. This time to a heavily rotated LAFC squad that was still probably inebriated coming off that midweek Open Cup Championship match where they went to extra time and then had to travel across the country. The Orange and Blue struggled mightily in the first half, failing to generate a single shot on target while conceding a sloppy goal to take a 1-0 deficit into the break. The introduction of Sergio Santos at halftime helped FCC to get moving a bit more in the second half, and they did manage to tie the game up at 1-1 through a Luca Orishano strike. Despite the improved play, though, LAFC was able to bring on their first team players late in the match, and superstar winger Denis Bouanga grabbed the game winner, sending FCC fans home cold, wet, and unhappy. Why was FCC so poor in the first half? What did Sergio Santos do to help the team get better in the second? And was poor possession, poor wingback play, or poor Ian Murphy the 2 goals FCC conceded? We'll discuss these questions and more, but we're going to have to do it alone because due to a scheduling conflict, Justin Hoyt is not able to join me today. But don't worry, he'll be back next week. As you all know, we're sponsored by Apollo Home. Give them a call if you have any HVAC, plumbing, or electrical needs. But before you do that, and while you have your phone out, please head on over to the socials and give me a follow. I am at FC Cincy Tac Talk. And as always, you can drop me a note at Cincy Soccer Talk or in the electronic mail slots, feedback at CincinnatiSoccerTalk.com. Now let's hit the film room. All right, I'm going to jump right to it because no small talk with Justin here. We had John Reichert got in touch, and John says, I said it earlier this season, but last year we played with a chip on our shoulder, and now this year it seems like, especially at home, we just walk in and expect to win, and when the performance falters, need to stop expecting to win and show we deserve to win every game. At San Soccer says the talent is here to do big things. It feels at times that the mindset of the team doesn't match the talent. At San Soccer says mindset, huh? At Doge Guy and Ryan Ernest got in touch with similar questions, asking about why FCC gave the ball away so frequently. So I want to start with that ugly first half. Man, I got to be honest. It was pretty much the worst I've seen in a while. Didn't complete a pass until the 4th minute. Literally, I went back. It wasn't until the 4th minute that they completed a single pass. And even then, they completed 2 quick passes, and then Nico had the ball tackled away from him, and it was just another giveaway. And it's not like LAFC just had all of the ball. There were 4 or 5 chances in that time that FCC had the chance to gain possession. But the players in Orange and Blue were just hacking the ball clear. It's like they didn't understand the game flow, or they were worried about pressure. I'm not sure. It wasn't until the 6th minute that they had any sort of meaningful spell of possession. And through 15 minutes in the match, the possession was skewed 61% to 39% in favor of LAFC. And we talk a lot about the mentality of this team, especially with the slow starts. As I watched this match and I tried to look for some indication of why it was happening, it made me start to think, I wonder if this is not overconfidence, or they don't have that chip on their shoulder, or they expect to win, or anything like that, or even that they're coming out flat and with not enough energy. These guys look so flustered by LAFC's press, which was not a super high press. It was not a Red Bull's energy drink soccer, we're going to get down your throat. And yet they were so intimidated by it. It made me wonder, I wonder if playing at home, some of these young guys, some of these guys new to Cincinnati, actually just can't handle how good the home environment is. Maybe they are too juiced up by that fantastic crowd. You know, I want to ask Justin about playing in front of the Bailey and if that's any chance that that's right, because I've coached a lot of teams and I've coached in big environments and I felt those nerves, but I have no idea what it is to go out and play in front of a home crowd and feel that pressure to win. But I wonder if that's part of it. The other thing I noticed a lot in this match is that LAFC's physicality within their press seemed like it put FCC off. I'm not sure if FCC were just not expecting it to be that physical, or whether LAFC decided, hey, we're going to come in here and assert that we belong, and we're going to do that right away. You know, in the 5th minute, you had Maxime Chanot come in and make a tackle on Lucho that was absolutely the kind of tackle that's like, hey, I want to send you a message. You're not going to be comfortable tonight. He came flying and tackled over top of the ball and made sure he got Lucho's legs. It's the kind of tackle that live, when I was in the stadium, I was just like, oh, that was a terrible tackle. Yeah, good. Early yellow card. Watching it back on the replay, man, I got to be honest, that card was probably orange, if not a potential red. I'm surprised that VAR didn't take a look. I'm surprised that the announcers on the broadcast didn't say more about it, because it was a vicious tackle. But it's the kind of tackle where Chanot probably knew he could get away with it and maybe not even get carded, although he got a card, but it sends a message. And I just wonder if when an opponent comes in and starts off being like, okay, we're on the road in this intimidating environment, and we really need to send a message here. So they play physical, they up the tempo in their press because they want to not let FCC get out to a quick start. I wonder if the team leaders on FC Cincinnati, instead of being like, all right, guys, let's go win this game, and bringing that energy, if they need to do something to calm the team down, maybe get a hold of the ball, pass it around a bit. Don't just play it long. Maybe take a few extra seconds over throw-ins and goal kicks, things that you see veteran teams do when things are going off the rails. Jose Guerra got in touch via email to ask whether LAFC were really that good on the night, or whether there was something in the tactical setup that helped them overwhelm FCC's back line. So I want to talk a little bit about those tactics too, of the first half, and why I think maybe they didn't really favor FC Cincinnati. So offensively, LAFC played really patiently and possessed the ball. They moved it side to side, and they did that out of a 3-4-3 formation. So 3 center backs, 2 wing backs, and 2 holding midfielders, no attacking midfielder, a center forward, and 2 wings. But what they did is they allowed those wingers, David Martinez and Matty Bogusz, to float off of those wings into that number 10 position. So at any time in the game, either one of those guys could become like a number 10. So in FCC's fairly rigid 3-4-1-2 that they play, there were a lot of times when DeAndre Yedlin and Luca Orshano had to sit and mark the LAFC wingbacks that were pushing really high. And that meant those wingers that were drifting in off the edges had to be marked by center backs Ian Murphy or Miles Robinson. And they had to do that by stepping into the midfield, because those players were not playing high up like strikers. So the thing about that is that's not a system that is uncommon, right? That's a lot how Inter Miami play when they do play a 3-4-3. Like Lionel Messi plays a right wing position, even though he's floating into the middle all the time, and teams should know how to communicate through that. But what it does mean is when you have guys like a Luca Orshano that are not natural wing backs, and then you have guys like Ian Murphy, or a little bit younger, maybe not the best in 1v1 defense, it allows the team to kind of dictate what matchups that they get. Now, really, what Jose was asking about is the back line being overwhelmed. Even within all of that I talked about, I think that Miles Robinson, Ian Murphy did a pretty good job accounting for these guys in the run of play for the most part. But the big issue here was that 3-4-3 and the way that LAFC were able to keep the ball, and the way that FCC was not able to keep the ball, was that LAFC was able to play really high up the pitch for that entire first half. And FCC couldn't keep the ball enough to make them drop off. I talked about it. It wasn't until the 15th minute that possession started to skew back to anything resembling normal. They never got comfortable on the ball until that point. FCC didn't. So what that meant is even though FCC's defense was doing a pretty good job limiting LA to shots through traffic and some hopeful crosses, what happened was FCC just couldn't get out of their own end. And so LAFC was on them constantly. They had 11 shots with 4 on target in the first half. And even though they weren't great chances, that amount of pressure just building up over time, things start to break apart. You start to question what moves you're making. If you're going to have to block another shot, you start to wonder at what point does one of these squirt through. Now, a big part of that performance and FCC not able to get out of their own half was not just the LAFC team playing high. It was not just LAFC's press. It was just some key players in key positions playing really poorly. So I want to talk about them a little bit. I just want to call him out. Miles Robinson, he was not good enough in the first half, at least not when he was playing right center back. He was constantly giving the ball away, trying to split lines. And not the kind of turnovers where he tries to dump a ball into the corner and it goes out of bounds or Hugo Lloris picks it up. We're talking about the kind of turnovers where he passed it straight to an opponent, and all of a sudden the LAFC were in numbers up transition opportunities right back at FC Cincinnati. I do think he settled down after he moved to the middle. I don't know what that's about, whether he's more comfortable there or whether it was that break and play that allowed him to take a breath. We did talk a lot about Chido Awazium's passing last week. And I wonder if this isn't a case a little bit because Chido is such a good passer on the outside. Maybe Miles is trying to force things to try to meet that need when Chido's not playing out there. And then I also wonder if we talk about the rotation in the lineup, the way Miles and Chido are swapping back and forth, who's playing in the middle, who's playing on the right, sometimes mid-game, often mid-game. I wonder if these guys just aren't settled. Miles Robinson's passing is not his strong suit. He is not known throughout the league as a great passer, but I don't think he's as bad as he showed in the first half. And in fact, he had some great passes, one of which we'll talk about later, once he moved to the center and settled down. Another player that I thought really didn't show up, this is not going to be a surprise to anyone who watched the match, was Nico Gioacchini. He received 1 progressive pass. Now, he only played the first half, right? 7 touches total. He only attempted 3 passes. He had the best chance of the entire game in terms of XG and didn't even put it on target. That was in the 40th minute when a corner kick was hit to the back post to Alvis Powell, and he headed it back across right toward Nico, and Nico couldn't get off his feet quick enough and couldn't direct the ball on frame, and so he snapped his header like 3 yards over the bar from 3 yards away from goal. I was turning to my friend during that, and I said, I think if he didn't try to hit that so hard, he might have just been able to let it deflect off his face mask and into the net. But even beyond that chance that he missed, he just could not get involved offensively at all. And he wasn't really a presence on the press defensively either. I mean, he did have 1 tackle, but he also committed 2 fouls and was dribbled once. I just don't know if you're Pat Noonan, how you can continue to roll him out as a starter for this team. Now, the mitigating circumstance here is that the guy I'm going to talk about next, Lucho Costa, had a putrid first half. So maybe Nico being that bad was partially due to the fact that he didn't have the benefit of playing with good Lucho like some of the other players have had before. So let's talk about Lucho Acosta. Man, I'm not sure I've seen him play worse in orange and blue. Maybe I have, and I've just erased it from my memory. But there's plays like in the 12th minute when Orshano sprayed an awesome diagonal from the left touchline to Lucho hanging out behind the right-hand side of the defense. And he was 1v1 with Omar Campos, who is a decent defender, but is not like a lockdown defender. And he's coming in from the right onto his left. He has Nico running square to him in the box, and he could have just laid it on a platter for Nico. And Nico could have hit a first-time shot. He also has Kubo running from the midfield. He could have laid it back to the top of the box for Kubo, who would have been wide open. Instead, he tries to cut back to his right foot to go to the end line, and Campos just sticks a foot in and takes it off of him. And, fine, every dribbler is going to lose some dribbles, but that wasn't the only time. In the 20th minute, he received the ball in the center of the open field. He has Kubo and Nico running ahead of him. His team starts pouring forward to support. Lucho's in the open field. Good stuff's going to happen. Instead, he tries to meg Eddie Segura, and he just puts it off his standing leg and loses the ball. And because where he got the ball and how his teammates were pouring forward, it ends up being a terrible turnover. And LAFC is all of a sudden running down FCC's throats. Martinez receives a ball in the gap behind the FCC midfield, turns and dribbles forward. He has a 2v1 with Gough against Cheeto. They play a little 1-2 right around the center back, and he ends up getting a point-blank shot off at Roman. That's the one where Roman comes out at his near post, gets really big, and just kind of takes the ball off the chest and does a really good job keeping it out of the net. You know, speaking of Miles passing, we'd talk about an amazing pass he had once he settled in. In the 41st minute, he had an awesome through ball to Lucho where he sent him in on goal up the left side. That's the one where it looks like Lucho's going to hit it first time with his left foot because he's only got the goalkeeper to beat. Instead, he cuts it back to his right. And now the cut was so good, he could lay it off to Nico again, wide open. Instead, he tries to shoot, and that shot was blocked. Listen, I talk about Lucho on this podcast a lot, and for good reason. But when you're an MVP or a superstar or a team captain or whatever, you have to take the criticism along with the accolades when things aren't going well. And things were not going well for Lucho on the night. And they haven't been going well for him for a while. I don't know what it is. Is it just injury and rust? Is he still injured? Is it the fact that the pieces are rotating around him all the time? You can see him at times trying to figure out with Kubo or with Nico where he wants the ball, where they want the ball. But whatever it is, Pat Noonan has got to do something to settle his captain in, because if Lucho is playing this bad, FCC are not going anywhere in the playoffs. Unless Luca Orishano is amazing. But in this match, Luca Orishana, at least in the first half, was pretty bad. You know, he is typically the guy to get things going when Lucho is flat. But in this first half, he couldn't do it either. He was constantly giving the ball away. I mean, he definitely had a few nice moments, like the pass that I mentioned, that diagonal pass I mentioned before. But there were also some of those moments where it wasn't like even Lucho, where he's losing the ball on the dribble. It was where he would just try to pass to a player and mishit it and it'd go out of bounds. Or there was one where he went to receive the ball up the left touchline and just didn't control it, and it just rolled out of bounds. And the worst thing about that is Luca Orishano is playing wing back. And when you're a wing back whose main thing is offense, when your offense isn't going, and then you do what Luca did and just be like, you know what? I'm not really a defender. I think I'll let you all handle that part of the game. Things get bad quick. And LAFC were just able to get up that FCC left side at will. They had Kiki Oliveira over there as right wing back. Now, he's an offensive player, so they knew this was coming. They were going to pick on Orishano and Murphy. And then they had David Martinez, like I said, over there as nominally as a winger, floating in and out. And they would just run behind Orishano anytime Orishano decided not to track back, which was almost every time, which put Ian Murphy into a ton of 1v1 situations in his own box over and over against offensive players that are pretty good on the ball. And we'll talk about the goals because that's what happened. But before that, I think a glaring example, if you want to go back and look, was the 13th minute when LAFC have a throw in on the FCC left. The ball is thrown by Oliveira into Kai Kamara, who is being marked by Cheeto. And then you see Murphy is pulled forward on Martinez, like I said, floating off of that wing. That outside center back has to step into midfield. So Oliveira throws the ball in and then just runs. And Orishano, whose responsibility is Oliveira, turns and watches the ball as it goes into Kai Kamara. Oliveira just runs by him and gets the ball back and then cuts. He has Murphy then 1v1 in the box, and Murphy is tracking back from the midfield because he was on Martinez. So he's not even in set defense. So Oliveira is able to cut Murphy as Murphy's trying to recover and get a wide open shot off on his left foot. Luckily, hits it right at Roman. So the question needs to be asked, is Orishano's lack of defense too big of a liability to keep rolling him out there as a defensive player, as a wing back? Should Pat Noonan find a way to get him on the field playing up front? I don't know. I also understand that as a wingback, Orishano has done really good things, but you kind of have two choices here. Either you have to take your lumps with Orishano as a defender, and you have to make darn sure that between Pavel Buka and Ian Murphy, that left-hand side is locked down when Orishano goes forward or doesn't get back. Or you have to say, he is a good player. We'll get him on the field, just not at that position. Now, hear me out on this. It's probably never going to happen, and it's probably even too late in the season to make it happen, even if Noonan wanted. But I wonder, what if Noonan played that same system that I just talked about LAFC playing? What if Noonan played a 3-4-3 with Orishano as a right wing and Lucho as a left wing? And again, Lucho would be a wing like Messi as a wing. You wouldn't tell him to stay out there, but he would float out there, which he likes to do anyway. You know, I don't know if it would work. I don't know. I know a couple things. I know, one, it wouldn't be taking some forward who's banging in goals and taking him off the field, because we don't have any forwards doing that at the moment. I know it would give Orishano some defensive cover, because as a right wing out there, he would be playing with a wing back behind him, probably DeAndre Yedlin, and then a right center back behind him. I know that Lucho's non-defense as a left winger wouldn't be as big a deal, because he'd have a left wing back up there, probably Yamil Assad, also not a great defender, but then also Ian Murphy. So even though they're not the best defenders, you'd have two of them. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, and we'll get to this in the second part of the show, maybe Hidebe solves all this. Maybe Orishano playing on the right with a Miles Robinson behind him solves all this. But I do want to talk about one more thing before we get to the break and before we get to all that. And that's about how FCC has to find an alternate way to progress the ball. This was the time to do it. LAFC, I talked about it, because of their system. They were pushed so high up the field. They were able to just sit on those passes and just basically dare FCC to try to just lump it forward. And then they'd win the ball and just slam it back down FCC's throats. I don't understand why FCC didn't do enough to vary that attack up. With Nico and Kubo up top, you have some speed. They could have started hitting balls into the channel that, like I said before, even if they were turnovers, they'd be turnovers of the sort that you can recover from, you know? Or if you know this is going to be a problem to begin with, starting Big Kev, a hold-up player that can ping a ball into, solves a bit. Instead, what they had is two forwards in Nico and Kubo that continued to drop further into the midfield, meaning LAFC could just push up higher. We've seen in the past few matches, FCC have this awesome action where they do have one forward checking to the ball, but then the other one runs in behind him, right? Runs into the space that he's created. I've talked about that on this pod. I don't understand why they didn't do this in this match. I have to believe this was not a tactical Pat Noonan thing. I have to believe this was a Nico Kubo thing, and probably both of them wanted to be the guys checking too all the time. And I did see Kubo make a few runs in behind, and he wasn't getting the ball. But at that point, FCC, nothing was working for them, and they were just trying to complete passes. So who knows? But next, I want to dig into the defensive problems a bit more. And I do want to end with a little positivity, talking about Sergio Santos and how he came on and changed the game. But first, I need to let everyone know about our second sponsor, Beyond Exercise. Beyond Exercise is a local physical therapy and fitness business that helps people stay active and injury-free. In fact, they help some of our local MLS, MLS Next, and FCC Academy players with their health and performance needs. Check out their suite of services at gobeyondexercise.com. I also wanted to take a minute to let you know what I've been drinking this week. You know, I was able to get through watching this match twice. Nobody should have to do that, but I did so in part with the help of the Opera Cream Stout series out of Braxton Brewing. I tried 7 of these things, and I'm not going to review them all. What I will say is this: if you're heading out looking for the Braxton Opera Cream series, do yourself a favor and find the Party Source variant. That one is the Banana Foster's Opera Cream. I thought it was the best of the bunch and definitely worth giving a try. If you want to talk to me about beer or soccer, you can get in touch with me on the socials at FC Cincy Tac Talk. If you have a question or comment, you can get at me there or send me a note to feedback@CincinnatiSoccerTalk.com. All right, our next topic comes from Yego. I think that's how you say it, LLEGO. Wants to know, why did FCC even sign Teenage if he's not going to play? And also, has anyone investigated if a witch has put a hex or a spell on our center backs? Brett Sova got in touch and says, is anyone more underappreciated on the team than Alvis Powell? So let's talk about this defensive performance after Cheeto went out injured. I talked about how the lack of offense put the defense under so much pressure. In the 30th minute, Cheeto went out with a leg injury. News is good that he seems like he will not be back for New York City. If you're listening to this podcast, that's later on tonight. He won't be back for that match, but he should be back soon. What we saw is we saw Alvis Powell come in a straight swap. Actually, not, because Miles Robinson moved to the middle. Alvis Powell played right center. I thought at the time that he might go with a Yamil Assad and move Yedlin to right center back and shift Orshano over to the right. A lot of people want to know, why not Teenage Hadebe, right? That's what Diego wanted to know. Well, the only thing I think about that is I know for a fact Ian Murphy is a very left-footed center back. I also know that Teenage is a left-footed center back. I don't know that he's only one-footed. I'm not sure about that. We haven't seen Ian Murphy play on the right at all in his entire time at FCC, and Teenage has played left for his entire career. He might have a spot start or two on the right. I have no idea. I haven't been able to look into that. Moving when you're a very left-footed player to go play on the right is not just hard because you can't kick with that foot as well. We've talked to Justin about it in the past. The fact that you defend left foot forward or right foot to forward constantly, the way you move your hips, the way you drop in cover is totally different from side to side. It's opposite, right? So being able to do both is a skill set you develop. It's not something you're just like, you're a center back, you can play any of the positions. So why not Teenage in terms of that swap? I think that has to be a factor. Also, like Brett said, Alvis Powell has been really good for a lot of this season. He is certainly a guy who is good for a meltdown or a terrible play every now and again. That's always been his story. But he has been rock solid outside of those big dips, right? And you never know when you're going to get it, but it's a little bit of a roll of the dice. And when he's good, he's good. And he was good in this match. So the only time that he wasn't good was right after he subbed on. So Cheeto got hurt in the 30th minute. The sub happened and play resumed. And by the time all that happened, it was 33-20. The goal that happened at 33-43. So 23 seconds later. So I don't know if FCC were just still kind of like trying to figure things out. Maybe they hadn't really amped their energy back up after the sub. I don't know how hard it is for players out there to have a central defender like that go down and just roll back into it. I don't know if we should really criticize the players like, man, when that whistle blows, you have to be ready to go. Or if we can give them a little bit of a pass. I would say as a coach, no pass. You got to be ready. My guess would be Justin as a player would say, coach, it happens, man. When you have a player like that go out injured and you're trying to figure out the communication and you have a sub, you're trying to settle in. But anyway, the goal happened. I mentioned Alvis Powell not being great. It was really just his first touch. He just hits a long ball that he leaves a little short and it's headed away by the defense. And in reality, that shouldn't be that big of a deal. But the way FCC were playing, it was. The header away falled to Lewis O'Brien in the midfield, and Obi is closing on him, and Nico is collapsing on him from up the field. So I would call that like back checking, right? So Nico from ahead of him, Obi from behind. O'Brien just brings the ball down and splits those two on the dribble. And now he's dribbling across the middle of the field right at Pavel Buka, who freezes, right? So now you have three players, Nico and Obi chasing and Pavel Buka frozen staring. So when O'Brien just dishes the ball off to Kai Kamara, a little chop pass into his feet, Kai just lays it back into the path of O'Brien, who just keeps on running. And he's run past Buka at that point, run past everyone because Obi turns to chase the ball, because Nico stops following the ball because he's a forward, and because Pavel Buka had kind of frozen there trying to decide whether to close down the ball or whether to drop off. So O'Brien gets the ball right off, plays the ball to the corner of the box to Martinez, and Murphy is close by him. Martinez is just able to work the ball onto his left foot and slide it into the side netting. Murphy does get a touch, but not enough to block the shot. So I definitely think Murphy has to do better there. You have to keep him to the outside, although we saw later that didn't help when Bouanga had the ball. More on that later. But the thing about it is even though Murphy needed to do better, he nearly did enough. And really that breakdown from a pass from a center back that gets headed away happened way too easily. And it happened because Obi was chasing the ball. Let's talk about Obi. He also, along with Lucho, has just not been as good. Not lately. Again, he was injured. He came back and he just hasn't been the same. I don't know what he's dealing with, but he is chasing the ball so frequently. I don't know if Pat Noonan needs to sit him down and be like, man, if you're going to chase the ball, you better be taking it or taking the player. You can't not get anything and run in a circle, run out towards O'Brien, follow O'Brien, turn and run towards Kai Kamara, and then all of a sudden O'Brien has the ball again. You need to foul somebody. You need to do something. Or, and this might be more realistic, you have to get it through players' heads like Buka. When Obi is chasing, he will catch that guy. You don't have to close that ball down or freeze. Go ahead and drop off unless the guy is in immediate scoring position. Drop off. Let Obi chase him and try to get that tackle in from behind. And had Buka dropped off, he would have been able to provide support to the inside to Murphy quicker. Murphy would have been able to keep that guy on the outside, or he would have been coming on to his left foot right into Buka. Instead, he was coming on, and I think it was actually Nico who had kind of started to drift back there to try to get involved. Oh, and then there's Roman Celentano. Did Roman do enough there? I think that first shot would have been really tough, especially with the deflection to save. But the second one, not so much. So here's the thing about the second goal. It happened in the 73rd minute, and it started with a free kick from goalkeeper Hugo Lloris. Why is this? Again, we talked about it with Nashville. These long kicks from the goalkeeper that maybe the center back wins, maybe he doesn't win, but there's just no structure. Everybody stands around just expecting that center back to head the ball far back up the field. So instead, they're just watching him. When it goes through, all of a sudden somebody's on a breakaway or in 1v1 defense. Reese just hoofs it towards Giroud. Nothing fancy. In fact, Giroud doesn't even win the ball. He just blocks Miles off so Miles can't win it. And it bounces through, right? All of a sudden, you have Denis Bouanga, who is the all-star on that team, of all-stars, of course, but the guy, and he's 1v1 in the box with Murphy. He takes him inside, then he takes him outside and hits a rocket at the near post. Did Murphy do enough there? I don't know, because he didn't let him shoot with his left foot, but maybe Bouanga was never going to shoot with his left foot. He's a right-footed player. He's a little Luca Orishano, but opposite out there. Maybe Murphy should have pushed him onto his left foot there. But regardless, he forced him into a shot from a bad angle, and Roman gets beat at his near post. So again, confluence of events. But I would go back, whether Murphy did enough or not, whether Roman did enough or not. You can't have zero structure around that ball. When it is going up in the air towards Giroud and Miles Robinson, the other defenders need to be dropping in case Robinson doesn't win that ball. And they just weren't. I promised some positivity. Let's get there. I thought Alvis Powell was so good. I talked about FCC being too static on offense in the first half of the show, where there was not a lot of movement. There was both Nico and Kubo checking to the ball, but not running away. The great thing about Alvis Powell when that happens is he just dribbles and he keeps going. He was like the best 1v1 player on the pitch for FC Cincinnati. In the 48th minute, he picked a ball up at the midline and dribbled through 5 defenders and hit a shot at the near post. And it was FCC's first shot on target of the match by Alvis Powell after dribbling from midfield through 5 defenders. He got a little lucky, but he went and he kept going. Something Orishano and Lucho weren't really able to do. He had a couple other moments where he carried the ball forward under pressure. He was second on the team with 4 progressive carries. And remember, he didn't play the first 30 minutes. He also had 3 shots. He tied for the team lead with 0.4 expected assists and was third on the team behind Luca and Lucho with 6 shot creating actions. Talk about an offensive threat from outside center back. Alvis Powell was really good. Now, you don't want him doing that all the time if he can pick and choose his moments, but you could do a lot worse than a backup outside center back than Alvis Powell, at least how he played in this match. Also pretty good defensively. He had a tackle and 3 interceptions and didn't really get beat 1v1 on the night. Oh, man. Okay. Before we get to our mailbag, the last thing that I want to tackle when I talk about positivity is I want to talk a little bit about the second half and how it got better. I mean, the team still lost, but it got better, right? There were tactical changes in the second half that made things better. And the tactical changes that were made, actually really just one that I saw, was Santos. Santos for Nico was the entire tactical switch. And here's why. Santos ran around so much more than Nico did, and more than Kubo did in the first half. He was making darting runs from the middle of the field into the channels, those little curling runs we saw Brandon Vasquez make a living off of. He was hanging out wide and then leaving places like Kubo and Lucho room to work in the middle because he had floated out there. He was fighting for every deflected or loose ball. And that's where FCC's goal came from. It came from a corner, but the corner kick was created in part by Santos. It was the 60th minute and Ian Murphy was on the ball, and Santos makes a run. Instead of just chilling there like everyone else was doing the first half, he made a run from the center of the field out towards the left touchline, and he receives the pass. Does a great layoff to Orshano, who was able to pick the ball up running towards the goal. Doesn't have anywhere to go. So Santos continues to float wide to give Orshano space to dribble, but Orshano gives the ball back to him. And because he had floated wide and kept his head up, he saw that there was a one-touch pass to the middle of the field, and he takes it. He plays a 35 or 40-yard pass from that left touchline to the middle to a wide-open Lucho Acosta at the top of the 18. Such a good pass that Lucho Acosta could have hit it one touch. Of course, why hit it one touch when you can try to take a touch or try to dribble someone? He takes a touch instead of shooting first time, then hits the shot, and it's deflected out for a corner. The corner's taken short, played to the near sideline corner of the box to Orshano, who is coming into his left and rips from distance. The ball is deflected by Kai Kamara, but winds up in the back of the net. It was a great shot, a lot of luck from the deflection. And there's not a lot of talk there in the goal because that goal is only as repeatable as Luca Orshano is brilliant, which means it is repeatable because he hits that shot. He almost had that same shot earlier in the game, right? But the repeatable thing that you can rely on over and over was the play that led to that. It was something that the team was missing in the first 45 minutes, and that is strikers moving to create space for each other, right? The question is why can't Santos do that when he starts? Because I hear it say he's not a 90-minute fit player. Okay. Well, when he starts, it's not like he does it for the first 45 minutes and then drops off. When you start Santos, he doesn't do these things. I don't get the mentality thing there. And so I don't think Santos is a starter for this team because I think there's something about watching his teammates play and getting fired up and into the match and then coming on fresh when the defense is tired that allows Santos to know that he can own that back line and go out and do it. Now, was this a case of FCC playing better in the second half, aided by Sergio Santos, or was it a case of LAFC just tiring down the stretch when they, because of travel, because of the midweek game and all that? We can't know. I know that when they brought their starters on, Giroud and Tim Tillman and Tenny Mwanga, they won. I also know that even though they won, it was through a shot that probably shouldn't have gone in if Roman was a little bit more on point. Probably shouldn't have happened if the team didn't fall asleep on a long kick from the goalkeeper. And FCC played a lot better in the second half. So I do think there are some things that you can hold on to, even in a match that for the most part just left me dreading having to watch again. All right. Before we go into the mailbag, I want to take a minute to thank all of you, our incredible supporters. Thank you for downloading today's episode or watching or listening online. And thanks for continuing to do so week in and week out. That said, we're kind of a small crew here. There's about 500 of us that listen or watch this show regularly. And I'd really like to grow that. It just feels like we've hit a plateau. And I know how you can help. All you need to do to help grow this show is a couple things. Tell a friend about us. That's a super easy one. You're having a beer at Standard before the match. Be like, oh, hey, you guys are talking about this. If you ever listen to Coach's show, Talking Tactics, it doesn't even have to be a friend. You just overhear, just eavesdrop on a conversation. You can also head on over and rate and review the show at CincinnatiSoccerTalk.com/Coach Apple Podcasts. And of course, you can always become a supporter of Cincinnati Soccer Talk over at CincinnatiSoccerTalk.com/support. You've heard the show. You know how I set the agenda. I love watching the match for the second time with ideas in mind. Oh, I'm going to watch for this thing. And the way I get those ideas is from you. If you have questions for me, if you want it to be about a specific tactic in a game or a player, get in touch with me. If you want Justin's perspective on something, get in touch with us. You can get at us on social media or drop us a note in the mailbag. Speaking of the mailbag,
you've got mail.
Our first and only question that I'm going to use as a framework to talk about a couple things comes from Jared Red Squad. Jared asks, how can FCC best move forward in the playoffs? Jared feels that most fans' ambitions at this point are now just looking at the offseason and next season because it feels like FCC can't win anything this year except maybe a spot in CONCACAF Champions Cup. At Sans Soccer would prefer to see the strongest lineup on the field for every one of the last 3 games to give the team time to gel, and wants to know if Nico should be part of that group. So Justin and I talked about lineup last week, so I don't want to go through a whole lineup, but I do want to talk about the overall goals that I would have for the last 3 matches. So question 1, is it more important to win as many of these matches as possible so that you have momentum going into the playoffs, or to get the lineup right to let those guys get into a rhythm and start to gel, regardless of whether that means winning or losing? Personally, I know that there's a CONCACAF Champions Cup spot on the line if you don't finish above RSL in the overall Supporter Shield standings. But also, I think FCC's best lineup that they're ready for the playoffs, giving them time to gel, should allow you to win at least one of these 3 games down the stretch, and that should be enough. I think you have to prioritize. If you want a chance to win a championship, that's what your goal is. And I think that means getting the right guys on the field, putting them in positions that you're going to have them in the playoffs, not just trying to makeshift things game to game like Pat Noonan has been doing all year. And I want to emphasize the repeatable performance. These are the things we want to do every game. When I'm not seeing them, I'm going to show you. Okay. But when you're moving different guys in and out and you're like, this guy is doing it, but that guy's not, it doesn't give you the time to really spend with those 11 players, or maybe more likely 13 players, because there are going to be a couple people that switch in and out, right? To really develop something. So what about results? Jared mentioned that fans are already turning the page on 2024. And if FCC wins, it would be, I guess, just a bonus. So my question to all of you, I guess, is if FCC wins the first round of the best of 3 series, but then loses in the second round to Crew, can we look at this season as a success? Is it just a meh, or is it an utter failure? Honestly, when I think about how much I see this team can do talent-wise, I would be disappointed with a second round loss, even to the Crew, who are supposedly, if you listen to Extra Time Radio, God's gift to all that is soccer in America. I mean, the way these guys can take a draw at DC United and talk about them in the Crew in glowing terms makes me physically ill. Sorry, that was an aside. Anyway, moving on. I think, though, when I think back to the beginning of this season and where I was predicting FC Cincinnati would be with so much rotation. I mean, I think we were talking like 5 new starters, something like that. You had Orishano, you had Pavel Buka, you bring in Chidozie Awaziam in the midseason. When you think about losing a stalwart defender of the year like Matt Miazga, when you think about then losing one of your main glue guys and energy bringers and the guy who makes sure you don't start flat, and Nick Hagland, right? You start thinking about the positions that they've lost these guys in and the change. And you think, honestly, finishing 3rd in the East is pretty good. It's higher than I predicted, or maybe right at where I predicted. We'll do that in the offseason where we review all that. Oh, man. But I think big picture, if they win the first best of 3 series and they do so pretty convincingly, and then they go and they happen to fall to Crew, but it's a tight match and it's not like they don't collapse, I think we can all sit back at the end of the season and be like, you know what? This was a good building block towards next season, when hopefully they'll return more players and maybe add 1 or 2 big pieces too. So last question based on this, if I could prioritize one thing through these next 3 games, what would it be? I already talked about it's not winning, although you need to do that. I already talked about getting the guys, the right guys on the field so they can gel, but I don't think that's the biggest thing that I would emphasize. I think the biggest thing that I would emphasize over these next 3 matches is whatever we do, we have our system in place. And of course, we're going to talk about playing that way. We're going to talk about our patterns of play. But the thing that I want to emphasize is these next 3 matches, I don't care what happens. You cannot start slow. This is an epidemic on this team coming out either flat or crappy, right? No starting slow. And if we start slow, I need to be looking at a couple guys that I need to be saying, it's on you. If we start slow, you better be picking up a yellow card for a Maxime Chanot type tackle that gets your team juiced up, right? I don't know if any of you have played competitive soccer, but if you have, you've probably been that person or had that teammate that when things are going slow, they just hack somebody and you're like, oh, all right, now we go, right? Maybe you get in somebody's face and you're like, that wasn't that bad of a foul. There's some pushing and now you go. We need a guy to do that. We need a Nick Hagland flying header over top of 2 attackers that makes the team juiced and ready to go. If I'm Pat Noonan, that's the thing I'm prioritizing. No more slow starts. No more slow starts coming out of the locker room. We are going to be tuned in and ready to go from minute 1 every time. And that is it for this episode of Talking Tactics with Coach Gough. Whew, man, if you want to do me a huge favor, make sure you're subscribed. Head on over to CincinnatiSoccerTalk.com/Coach Apple Podcasts, rate and review the show, and please tell a friend. Other than that, all I can say is thanks for listening. Thanks to producer Mike. Yes, thank you so much, Mike, for making this show audible. Hopefully, like I said, I don't know yet in reality. But thanks to all of you most of all. You know, I had fun today, and I'm hoping you did too. This is Coach Brad Gough reminding you that soccer is a privilege. So whether watching, coaching, or playing, don't forget to smile.